After the last war, and mainly during the past 10 or 15 years, what I'll describe as a rash of new academic courses has broken out, all concerned with communication in some sense or other, especially in the USA and in Britain. And in this short talk, I want to try to examine why this should be. But first, I owe you an apology. You may wonder why it is that I, a technologist by trade, should be asked to talk at all in a social sciences foundation course. Well, to me, technology is essentially a social study, and it makes no sense to speak of it as though it were nothing more than a branch of physical science. And I'll bet my bottom dollar that within the next 10 years or so, we shall witness an increasing attention being paid to social studies within engineering departments in our universities and colleges. Or, if not, engineering will perish as a distinct academic study. Again, in turn, those of you who are concerned with social studies, with human institutions, need to understand what technology really is, in particular the technologies of communication, which we in the industrialized countries envisage, for example, as radio and television, the telephone service, the airways, cars, the telex, etc. Or perhaps as printing, as in the newspapers, books, libraries, photography. Or again, perhaps as more recent things like computers or databanks. And to these I would add one of the oldest communication techniques of all, namely money. All these things are very diversified, and what can they possibly have in common? Well, very simply, they are all techniques of sharing, for that is what the word communication means, sharing. It enables activities at one place to be related to activities at another place. That is, it offers us the powers to organize. And the forms of social institution that can be organized can only be those that are possible with the techniques of communication that the people possess. And any newly introduced technique opens up new possibilities of social organization, and will encourage some new social institutions to develop, and will discourage others. For example, as canals last century, and then the railways, encouraged the heavy industries, or as the typewriter encouraged employment of educated women in office life, or as the telex encouraged news agencies, and the airways encouraged the tourist industry. Today, the computer and the duplicator, the international telephone, are repeating the tale. All technology, but communication technology above all, alters our powers of action, and as a consequence, changes our views of ourselves, our thinking, and our feelings. It was the existentialist thinker Martin Heidegger who saw technology for what it really is. It was mediator between man and raw nature. It is the means whereby we come to see our own particular worlds. I should like to emphasize that I am not saying that technology, even communication technology, decides human history. No, I refer only to possibilities of action or impossibilities, to conceivable powers or to their inconceivability. Technology itself, machinery, artifacts if you like, are all dead stuff, and the things have no powers of action in themselves whatsoever. The powers they potentially create lie wholly in the hands of those who possess and use them. It is popularly said today that we, in the so-called advanced countries, are a technological society. But, strictly speaking, all human societies are technological in character. For hasn't the anthropologist described man as the tool-maker and tool-user? That is, man to be man must be a technologist, even though he possesses no more than a stone axe or a talking drum. It is not technology in itself that marks off our Western world as special. It is rather the process we call industrialization. At the start of this talk, I referred to the great diversity of academic disciplines that are concerned with communication. At research level, there are studies going on that can be said to have a certain common thread, and perhaps nothing more, in, say, psychology, sociology, linguistics, physiology, and, of course, technology. Again, communication is of interest to those of us within education, and journalism, and the visual arts. I should like to outline very briefly how this may have come about. But above all, I want to avoid giving you the idea that these fields are beginning to unify, or that a new academic subject is emerging called communication, because I don't believe that this is so. But let me give a little potted history of this communication explosion, the sudden development of research activity, and the parallel development and growth of our national and international communication services since the end of World War II. If we can give any meaning to the idea of historical origin, the origin of this great flourishing of communication would be the war itself. World War II was fought on very fluid battlefronts, or often on no fronts at all. Modern armaments ensured that, and their deployment required every communication aid that could be found or invented. Scientific and technological personnel were mobilized on a large scale to work upon problems of air and sea navigation, on gun laying and prediction, upon radar, in which I myself was involved, and other problems of communication and control. These research workers came from a number of different academic disciplines: mathematics, physics, engineering, even zoology. For example, I was working alongside a psychologist for a while. Many of these aids to military communication were based upon electronic techniques, and the electronics industry of that time was mobilized too. There were enormous developments of technique, especially for transmitting and receiving microwaves, and for rapid processing of information. By the end of the war, we were left with a large electronics industry looking for markets to create, and a great accumulation of communication know-how. At the same time, the world situation was such as to encourage the spread and use of communication services. For wartime BBC broadcasts had taught people the news habit, and the social situation encouraged demand for more widespread and better education. The wartime news had turned people's interest to other countries, whilst industry and business needed reorganization. There were many social reasons created by the war why the electronics industry should continue to produce new techniques, and why communication traffic of all kinds should expand nationally and internationally. One of the first results was the revival of television. For remember, the BBC had been broadcasting television already before the war. Another one was the development of much automatic machinery, using the principle of feedback, which rapidly found many industrial uses. The mathematician Norbert Wiener in the USA had worked during the war upon gun laying and automatic guidance problems. It was he who promoted this study to its limit, under the title of cybernetics. His book, Cybernetics, aroused great interest in the 1940s. In this, he spoke of the possibility of realizing the age-old dream of robots, that is, of machines simulating human behavior, though his actual claims were modest. Since that date, much heat has been generated in technical circles, many articles and papers and letters to the editor, raising again, with apparent new force, this ancient man-machine controversy. For the purpose of discussing problems of communication in such broad ways, some unifying theory or philosophy was needed, and the one that took hold and spread like a bush fire in technical circles was information theory. This mathematical theory was also the brainchild of Norbert Wiener, but its full development was due to his associate, Claude Shannon. Again, it revised a number of old ideas, but brought them up to date by firmly basing them on probability theory. Strictly speaking, information theory has nothing to do with information at all, as we normally use that word, because it has nothing to do with meaning. It deals with the physical properties of a communication channel, such as a telegraph or a telephone channel, with the signals conveyed and with their unpredictability. It enables us to compare the efficiencies of different channels of communication. In my own opinion, it has not contributed a great deal to technical communication systems, except in one important way. It has assisted us to design codes which are able to correct their own errors that occur in transmission. Such self-correcting properties can be very useful in computer operations, for instance. A second contribution made by information theory was by virtue of the way in which it stimulated new thinking and new experiments in other scientific fields, often for the wrong reasons, but stimulated them nonetheless. One of the first was experimental psychology. The question arose as to whether we could measure the rates at which human beings could handle information, an inquiry which led to new directions of thinking. Another field was philosophy. Because information theory did not touch upon questions of meaning, there was concern as to whether or not it could be extended to do so. Two semanticists in particular attempted this, Rudolf Carnap and Bar Hillel. Certain physiologists were also interested in information theory because it appeared to offer ways of describing the communication of signals in the nervous system, as Norbert Wiener had anticipated. Well, I could go on to describe how people of other disciplines also became interested in information problems, but time is short. I myself feel that the real value of this common interest lay in two things. First, it brought people together from different disciplines who felt they had some common problems to discuss, and who beyond doubt stimulated one another to new ideas. Second, the techniques of the communication industry, that is electronics, became available for their laboratories in wide variety and offering new experimental methods. Above all, it is microelectronics that has had the most profound result. Microelectronics can put vast numbers of electronic components upon a pin's head, and the great value of it is economic, because it can be made to be very reliable. If any large-scale communication system be installed, whether it be a satellite or a computer, or any other system carrying very heavy message traffic, it must essentially be reliable, because its failure would paralyze a large number of social institutions that it serves, industries and banks, business, government, airways, and many others. Although we who were concerned in these post-war developments in information have later gone our different ways, many of us have kept our acquaintance. It's like belonging to an old club that's broken up. But that's nostalgia. My own research direction during the past 20 years or so has turned me aside from formal mathematical and technical problems of communication, more towards psychological and sociological aspects. And I should like to end by giving some of my reasons. I have argued that technology is distinct from science, and that our teachings of it should bear this in mind. Science starts with an hypothesis, and proceeds to test this by experiment. Technology starts with a specification, upon which a design is based, and it ends by an assessment, both of which should take into account psychological and sociological factors. The design of an artifact, an industrial product, is not simply its physical properties, but is essentially the relation between the product and its intended users. The design will succeed only if account is taken of the user, his abilities, attitudes, culture, and even his society and its conditions. And how many of our exported products assume other people in this world, even in developing countries, to be just like ourselves? It had seemed to me that within communication technology we had taken the scientific and mathematical processes of design far ahead of our understanding of the bases of specification and of assessment. For example, in telephony, it's well known that the actual physical signals sent over the wire are nothing like the sounds from the speaker's mouth. Yet we seem to hear him speaking quite adequately. All our beautiful mathematical theory that we learnt in college is quite unable to account for this. Again, we still find it very difficult to measure how good a particular telephone channel is, or how much better it is than another one. Speech is still much a mystery, although speech studies were themselves greatly stimulated by the post-war activity that I described. Again, it depends upon the purpose of the speech channel. A telephone may serve one purpose, but it could never be adequate, say, for music, or for the interest that we call hi-fi. But what decides their different criteria? Well, let me give a simple demonstration. Just listen to this for a moment.
Charlie, Frozen 2. Ground view from Belfast, you at about 35, we have 01. Seven freight, serviceable.
That was intercom speech in an aircraft cockpit, and its quality is suitable for trained personnel only, who also use a restricted and specialized language. It would be quite unsuitable for, say, a public telephone service. For good design of future specialized speech channels, we need to know more about speech itself and its perception, and not rely solely upon empiricism and the experience of the past. The same is true of vision, too. Our past and present-day criteria of design are based much upon long experience of the printing industry and of television. But for future systems, we need to know more about visual perception and about the process of reading. At the sociological level, too, we shall need to know more about social institutions, especially, in my view, international ones, and how they can be organized or become inhibited by specific techniques of communication, either ones that exist already or conceivable new technical services. And cooperation will be needed between sociology and communication technology. Finally, although I am pressing for more interdisciplinary study in communication, I am not saying that we must be masters of several disciplines, because that's impossible. But we need some common understanding of our different aims and purposes and methods, and a greater willingness to listen to one another. Communication is not yet a unified study.